The movie opens with the breathtaking yet terrifying landscapes of Monument Valley. At first glance, these massive rock formations look beautiful and peaceful, but beneath that beauty lies a deadly danger that can claim lives in an instant. We're introduced to 5 climbers making their way up one of these towering cliffs. 3 of them are members of the same family. Royce, a veteran mountaineer with years of experience, is climbing alongside his daughter Annie and his son Peter. The other 2 members of the team are far less experienced, and that mistake is about to turn into a nightmare. Under the blazing sun and surrounded by dizzying heights, the group slowly climbs higher and higher. The 2 inexperienced climbers are slightly ahead of the others when disaster suddenly strikes. They lose their footing on the slippery rock face, and within seconds, both of them begin plunging thousands of feet toward the ground. But the truly horrifying part is that all 5 climbers are connected to the same rope. The moment those 2 climbers fall, their combined weight yanks everyone else off the cliff. One after another, the remaining climbers lose their grip, and suddenly all 5 are hanging in midair with nothing but a single rope keeping them alive. That rope is attached to a small metal hook wedged into the rock above them. The problem is, neither the rope nor the hook was designed to support the weight of 5 people at once. Powerful gusts of wind and the enormous strain begin weakening the system with every passing second. Then things get even worse. The 2 climbers who originally slipped are now hanging at the very bottom of the rope. Without warning, the section of rope connected to them snaps. In the blink of an eye, they disappear into the abyss below. Now only Royce, Peter, and Annie remain. But the nightmare is far from over. Even with less weight on it, the rope continues sliding against the hook. The metal anchor slowly starts pulling out of the rock. Royce immediately realizes the horrifying truth. If the weight isn't reduced within seconds, the hook will rip free, and all 3 of them will fall to their deaths. Desperate to save everyone, Royce shouts at Annie, telling her to place a climbing clamp into a crack in the rock to relieve some of the pressure. Annie pushes herself to the limit. Her body trembles as she stretches with everything she has, but the crack is just out of reach. No matter how hard she tries, she can't get there. Royce is hanging at the bottom, with Peter directly above him. Then he makes a decision so heartbreaking that it's almost impossible to imagine. Looking up at his son, his eyes filled with love and desperation, Royce gives Peter a terrifying order. "Peter, take out your knife and cut my rope." Both Peter and Annie are completely stunned. Annie immediately starts screaming, begging her brother not to do it. Peter's entire body shakes with fear. How could he possibly cut the rope holding his own father? He knows exactly what will happen the moment he does. The second that rope is cut, Royce will fall thousands of feet into the darkness below. With tears in his eyes and a heart weighed down by grief, Peter is finally forced to make an impossible choice. Trembling with pain, he cuts the rope with his knife. Royce plunges into the abyss below, sacrificing his life. 3 years later, the scars of that horrific tragedy still haunt Peter. The guilt of his father's death has consumed him so deeply that he swore never to climb another mountain again. Now he works as a photographer for National Geographic, doing everything he can to stay far away from the world of mountaineering. But fate has other plans. While filming a documentary, Peter learns that a wealthy, high-profile expedition is preparing to conquer K2, the world's 2nd highest peak and one of the deadliest mountains ever climbed. The news hits him like a punch to the gut when he discovers that his own sister, Annie, is part of the team. Over the years, Annie has become a world-famous mountaineer, earning respect and recognition across the globe. In many ways, she's living the dream their father never got the chance to complete. Peter travels to the base camp to see her. But when the brother and sister finally come face to face after years apart, there are no hugs, no smiles, and no emotional reunion. Instead, an uncomfortable silence hangs between them. The wounds of the past are still fresh, and Annie continues to blame Peter for their father's death. Peter soon learns that a 5-person team, including Annie, plans to reach the summit by Tuesday. The expedition is funded and led by Elliot Vaughn, a wealthy businessman who recently purchased an airline company. His plan is simple but incredibly ambitious. He wants to stand on top of K2 at the exact moment his airline's first flight passes overhead, creating a global spectacle and proving his power to the world. The night before the climb, Elliot throws a lavish celebration at base camp. Everyone is enjoying themselves until a mysterious and serious-looking man named Vic arrives. Vic is no ordinary climber. He's a seasoned mountaineer who has already conquered K2 once before. He knows every dangerous corner of the mountain and understands how quickly its mood can change. Walking straight up to Elliot, Vic asks a simple question. What will you do if the weather turns bad up there? Filled with confidence and blinded by arrogance, Elliot brushes off the concern. He boasts that his team includes one of the world's best weather experts and claims there is absolutely no sign of dangerous conditions for the next 2 months. Vic shakes his head and delivers a chilling warning. Mountains don't answer to anyone. If a storm comes, it won't care who you are. But Elliot laughs it off and treats the warning like a joke. After that, Vic quietly leaves the party. Later that night, he shaves his beard, gathers his gear, and under the cover of darkness begins climbing K2 completely alone. The following morning, Elliot's 5-member team starts their ascent as well. Full of excitement and confidence, they push higher and higher into the frozen wilderness. Eventually, they reach an altitude of 26,000 feet, where the air is dangerously thin and every breath feels like a struggle. That's when a message suddenly comes through on the radio. A massive storm is racing toward them. Tom, the team's experienced leader, immediately recognizes the danger. He warns everyone that the situation is extremely serious and insists they turn back at once. But Elliot refuses to listen. Obsessed with his airline promotion and desperate to reach the summit, he argues that they are only an hour away from their next target camp. Besides, he believes the storm might change direction, just like weather reports often do. Unfortunately, on a mountain like K2, overconfidence can be far deadlier than the storm itself. Tom and Annie knew they were walking straight into a death trap. But under pressure from Elliot's money and his relentless determination, they had no choice but to risk their lives and keep moving forward. Back at the base camp, Peter watched in growing panic as the team ignored the storm warnings and failed to turn back. The painful memory of losing his father came rushing back. Desperate, he grabbed the radio and contacted Tom again, shouting that a massive storm was approaching from the south. If they didn't turn around immediately, none of them would survive. But once again, Elliot managed to convince Tom with his smooth words and false confidence. Through his binoculars, Peter could only watch helplessly as his sister Annie continued walking toward the deadly trap fate had laid before her. He had already lost his father, and there was no way he was going to lose his sister too. Then nature unleashed its true fury. Without warning, a violent blizzard slammed into the mountain. Thick snow and bone-chilling cold surrounded the climbers as the 5 of them struggled to push forward through the storm. Suddenly, the snow beneath Annie's feet gave way. A massive section of ice collapsed, and Annie began plunging into a deep crevasse hidden between 2 cliffs. Since everyone was tied together by the same rope, her fall dragged the others toward the edge as well. For a brief moment, luck seemed to be on her side. As Annie dangled just above the abyss, her rope caught on a sharp rock. But in the very next second, the rope snapped in half. Annie fell deep into the crevasse. She survived the fall, but now she is trapped. The remaining climbers were scattered by the raging storm. Then, disaster struck again. A gigantic avalanche thundered down the mountain, racing toward the team like death itself. 2 more climbers were caught in its path and killed in a horrifying instant. Now, only 3 people remain alive inside the frozen crevasse: Annie, Elliot, and Tom. To make matters worse, the avalanche had sealed the entire crevasse beneath a massive layer of snow. The horrifying reality was clear. They had been buried alive beneath the ice. Cut off from the outside world, they had no idea what was happening above them. Rescue teams repeatedly tried contacting them over the radio, but no signal could get through. Fortunately, Annie knew Morse code, and Peter happened to know it as well. Using a small stone and a piece of metal, Annie began tapping out Morse code signals. Somehow, the instruments below detected the messages. The moment Peter learned that his sister was still alive, a wave of relief washed over him. But time was running out. Experts warned that at such an extreme altitude and in those freezing temperatures, the survivors wouldn't last more than 36 hours. Their oxygen supply was running dangerously low, and they were quickly running out of essential medication. And there was one terrifying problem nobody could solve. How could rescuers locate their exact position beneath tons of snow? And even if they found them, how could they possibly break through a mountain-sized wall of ice before it was too late? It seemed impossible, but Peter refused to give up. Determined to save his sister, he made the ultimate decision: to climb back up the mountain himself, even if it cost him his life. To pull off the rescue, Peter approached the army and requested powerful nitroglycerin explosives. These bombs were extremely unstable. Even the slightest shock or direct sunlight could trigger a deadly explosion. Meanwhile, Elliot's company announced a reward of 5 million rupees for anyone willing to join Peter on this near-suicidal mission. Tempted by the money, a rescue team was quickly assembled. Before the journey began, Peter was advised to recruit a man named Vic. He was the same experienced climber who had warned Elliot before the original expedition. Vic carried a tragic past. 4 years earlier, his wife, a famous mountain guide, had disappeared on this very mountain during a devastating storm. Desperate to find her, Vic climbed into the deadly heights himself. He never found her body, but he did manage to save the lives of 3 stranded climbers. The mission came at a terrible cost. Severe frostbite destroyed several of his toes, leaving permanent scars. Even now, he still wandered these dangerous valleys, searching for any trace of the woman he had lost. Peter and his team traveled by helicopter to find Vic. At first, Vic flatly refused to help. He knew that attempting K2 under these conditions was practically a death sentence. But when Peter reminded him that he had once climbed Everest alongside Peter's father, Royce, old memories came flooding back. Finally, Vic agreed. The moment he took command, Vic made one thing clear. This wasn't about breaking records or chasing glory. This was a rescue mission, and every step would be taken on his orders. Meanwhile, deep inside an icy cave, the condition of the 3 trapped climbers was getting worse by the minute. The freezing temperatures were causing their blood to slow and their bodies to shut down. Tom was suffering the most. With oxygen running dangerously low, his lungs were beginning to fail. The group had a limited supply of life-saving medication that helped them breathe. But Elliot's selfish nature quickly surfaced once again. He refused to share his medicine with anyone else, even if it meant Tom would die. In fact, Elliot wanted Tom gone as soon as possible so he could use Tom's share of the medication and increase his own chances of survival. But Annie couldn't stand by and watch. Feeling sorry for Tom, she secretly gave him one of her own injections. When Elliot discovered what she had done, he completely lost control. Furious and enraged, he turned on Annie, shouting at her and blaming her for wasting precious supplies. Outside, Peter and Vic's rescue team continued their dangerous ascent, risking their lives with every step. The unstable nitroglycerin explosives had to be carried with extreme care, like ticking time bombs ready to explode at any moment. And as they pushed deeper into the mountain, nature itself seemed determined to test their limits. One of the team's fuel tanks suddenly starts leaking, and the moment the first rays of sunlight hit it, a massive explosion erupts. The blast is so powerful that it shakes the entire mountain. 2 members of Team C are killed instantly. The explosion also dislodges huge layers of ancient ice, and that's when Vic notices a frozen hand sticking out from the snow. As he moves closer to investigate, he freezes in shock. The body trapped in the ice is none other than his wife, the woman he had been searching for over the last 4 years. Amazingly, her body remains perfectly preserved beneath the ice. With tears in his eyes, Vic removes his wedding ring from her finger and places it inside the locket hanging around his neck. But moments later, Peter discovers a small medical box nearby. The sight of it leaves Vic completely devastated because it reveals a horrifying truth. 4 years earlier, when Vic's wife was stranded during the storm, Elliot had been there with her. To save himself, Elliot stole all of her dexamethasone medication and abandoned her to suffer alone. In that moment, Vic finally realizes that the person truly responsible for his wife's death is Elliot. Consumed by rage and grief, Vic sets out toward the cave where Elliot is hiding, determined to make him pay. As night falls, Annie's condition becomes critical. She contacts Peter over the radio and, in a weak voice, tells him to turn back. "Peter, go home. None of us are going to see the sunrise. Don't risk your life for us." Peter tries to comfort her, but he can barely hold back his own tears. That same night, Elliot commits his most horrifying act yet. While Annie lies unconscious, he quietly crawls over to Tom and injects an empty syringe filled with air into his veins. The air bubble travels through Tom's bloodstream, causing him to suffocate within moments. He dies almost instantly. When Annie finally wakes up, she finds Tom's body cold and lifeless. Spotting the empty syringe nearby, she immediately realizes what happened. Elliot murdered Tom to save his own precious supply of medicine. Suddenly, chunks of ice begin falling from the cave ceiling. Then, through the darkness above, they notice a faint beam of light shining down into the cave. Peter and Vic finally made it to the exact spot. Moving carefully, they placed their last nitroglycerin charge and triggered a massive explosion that blasted open the entrance to the cave. Without wasting a second, Peter climbed down into the darkness and found his sister, Annie. He quickly secured a rope around her, preparing to pull her back to safety. But at that very moment, Vic came face to face with Elliot. Vic had every reason to kill him right there. After everything Elliot had done, nobody would have blamed him. But Vic was a true mountaineer. Despite all the hatred and pain, he chose not to leave anyone behind. He tied Elliot to the rescue rope as well. Then disaster struck. The section of the mountain they were standing on suddenly gave way beneath them. In an instant, the scene became eerily similar to the tragedy from 3 years earlier. Peter was hanging at the top, desperately gripping the rock face. Below him, Annie, Vic, and Elliot dangled one beneath another on the same rope. The loose mountainside was crumbling apart, and the anchor hook was slowly being pulled out of the rock. Vic immediately realized the horrifying truth. The rope couldn't hold all their weight. If nothing changed, Peter and Annie would die too. He looked up at Peter. There was a strange sense of peace in his eyes. Slowly, Vic reached into his pocket and pulled out the same old knife. Peter screamed, "No, Vic, don't do it." But Vic only smiled. And then he cut the rope. A second later, Vic and Elliot plunged together into the dark, bottomless abyss below, disappearing forever. In the end, Vic didn't just avenge his wife's death. He also gave Peter and Annie a second chance at life. Like a true father figure, he sacrificed himself so they could survive. As the first rays of sunlight broke over the mountain, Peter finally brought Annie safely back down to base camp. The hatred that once filled Annie's heart was gone. In its place was nothing but love, respect, and gratitude for her brother. She embraced Peter and finally forgave him for the mistake that had haunted them for years. With tears in her eyes, she told him, "Peter, if Dad were here today, he'd be proud of you. Proud of the courage you showed." Later, Peter built a beautiful stone memorial honoring everyone who risked and gave their lives during this deadly rescue mission. And with that emotional moment, this incredible story comes to an end. Subscribe to this channel for more stories like this.